What if I told you that one of the most controversial prophets in modern ministry is making a move that could shake the entire foundation of the Church of God in Christ? Yes, Prophet Carn, a man praised by some as anointed and condemned by others as deceptive, has just made a decision that's sending shockwaves across the gospel world. Is he really leaving COGIC to start something new? Or is there a deeper reason behind this so-called new church that no one's daring to talk about publicly? Because what's happening right now might not just be about leadership. It might expose the growing cracks inside one of the largest Black Pentecostal denominations in America. And trust me, once you hear the full story, you'll question whether this is a move of God or a rebellion in disguise. Carn has always been a lightning rod for controversy. Whether it's his bold prophecies, his undeniable charisma, or the swirling rumors surrounding his ministry, his name never stays out of the spotlight for long. But this time, the conversation has shifted to something even bigger, a major move that could mark a turning point in both his life and the future of the Church of God in Christ. Now, for those unfamiliar, the Church of God in Christ, or COGIC, isn't just any church organization. It's a global denomination with deep roots in Pentecostal tradition, history, and leadership. It has produced some of the most influential pastors, bishops, and gospel leaders of our time. So when a figure as high profile as Prophet Carn hints at moving in a new direction, people take notice, and not always in a positive way. The whispers began quietly. A few church insiders claimed Carn was preparing to pastor a new church, one not officially under the COGIC umbrella. Some said it was a calling, others said it was rebellion, and before long, speculation turned into public debate. In this video, we're breaking down what's really going on. Is Prophet Carn leaving the Church of God in Christ for good? Why now? And how could this decision reshape both his ministry and the denomination itself? You won't believe some of the hidden motives and behind-the-scenes details that have recently surfaced. Stay with me, because as we unpack this story step by step, you'll see how power, politics, prophecy, and personal conviction are all colliding in a way that might permanently redefine church leadership as we know it. But before we dive in, here's something to think about. When does obedience to God's calling cross the line into disobedience to established order? That's the very question at the heart of this unfolding drama. Now let's begin with how all of this started. The first signs that something was changing in Carn's ministry long before the public even noticed. To understand where Prophet Carn stands today, you have to go back a few years. Before the talk of new churches, before the recent sermons that raised eyebrows, and before the quiet distance that began forming between him and the traditional Church of God in Christ structure. Carn has never been your typical preacher. From his teenage years, he was labeled a prodigy, an anointed voice who could move crowds to tears with his prophetic accuracy and fiery preaching. People called him the young prophet, and his ministry gained national attention fast. He wasn't just another preacher, he was a spectacle, a phenomenon in motion. But with that kind of attention comes pressure and scrutiny. As Carn's influence grew, so did his independence. He started to establish his own identity separate from the denomination that once nurtured him. While other COGIC leaders were careful to move within the hierarchy, Carn began doing things differently. He launched independent conferences, developed his own leadership teams, and created global events under his own ministry brand, Kingdom City Church. At first, it seemed harmless. After all, many COGIC leaders also have ministries that stretch beyond the denomination. But insiders began to notice subtle changes, differences in doctrine, worship style, and especially the way authority was presented. In COGIC, leadership runs deep through structure and accountability. In Carn's movement, authority seemed to flow directly through him and him alone. One of the earliest public signs came when Carn began hosting major revival events without direct COGIC affiliation. He would often feature preachers and singers from across denominations, some controversial, others outside of Pentecostal tradition entirely. That inclusivity drew mixed reactions. Some said it showed growth and openness. Others whispered that it was a sign he was drifting away from his roots. Then came the sermons that hinted at separation. In one of his messages, Carn talked about the danger of being loyal to systems that have lost their oil. That statement alone sent ripples through church circles. Many believed he was indirectly referring to COGIC leadership, suggesting that the organization had grown more political than spiritual. And while he never outright said he was leaving, his language began to shift. He talked more about kingdom over denomination and obeying God over tradition. For many, those were just buzzwords. But for those who knew how churches operate, it was clear. Carn was mentally preparing for something bigger. By the time whispers began that he was planning to pastor a new church, the groundwork had already been laid. His followers were conditioned to see this not as rebellion, but as divine direction. His critics, however, saw it as another example of ego taking precedence over order. Still, the question remained, why now? Why make such a bold move at this point in his career, especially when his influence inside COGIC was already so strong? Because according to several sources close to his ministry, this decision didn't come out of nowhere. It was born out of tension, and that tension, it didn't start with doctrine. It started with power. Every great movement in the church has its moments of tension, moments when leadership vision collides with institutional control. And for Prophet Brian Carn, that collision wasn't just inevitable, it was explosive. For years, many within the Church of God in Christ admired Carn's energy, his prophetic accuracy, and his ability to draw massive crowds. He represented something COGIC desperately needed in the modern age: youth appeal, digital influence, and a fearless boldness that transcended the pulpit. But behind closed doors, that same boldness began to worry the leadership. According to multiple insiders, things started changing when Carn began building his ministry structure outside the traditional COGIC order. He established his own boards, launched international branches, and created online schools of prophecy, all under his own banner. While there's nothing inherently wrong with that, what troubled some leaders was that Carn's influence began overshadowing even some bishops and pastors who had served in COGIC for decades. Think about it. When people talked about revivals, they weren't talking about local district meetings anymore. They were talking about the move of God with Brian Carn. His name was the headline. His ministry became the attraction. And that kind of spotlight, in a system built on hierarchy, can cause serious discomfort. Behind the scenes, conversations reportedly took place among top officials. Some felt that Carn was drifting too far from accountability. Others believed he was becoming a denomination within himself. Then came the rumors, unconfirmed but widely discussed, that there had been quiet disagreements between Carn and certain bishops over finances, preaching engagements, and how prophetic ministry should be handled publicly. In one notable sermon, Carn indirectly addressed leaders who are more worried about control than calling. To his audience, it sounded like a powerful rebuke against spiritual manipulation, but to those in leadership, it sounded personal. It was almost as if he was drawing a line, a spiritual declaration of independence, and daring anyone to cross it. Then there was the question of loyalty. COGIC values structure, unity, and obedience to church governance. But Carn's message was different. He told his followers that obedience to God sometimes means disobedience to men. It was a fiery statement, and while it resonated with people who felt boxed in by tradition, it also sent a chilling message to the hierarchy. Soon, ministers and members began asking questions. Was Prophet Carn still officially part of COGIC? Did his new church, Kingdom City, operate under their jurisdiction, or had he silently pulled away? The answers were never clear. Intentionally, perhaps. Carn remained vague, neither confirming nor denying, letting curiosity build like a storm. Meanwhile, some pastors whispered that the denomination had grown uneasy about his growing empire. The numbers didn't lie. Thousands were tuning in to his live streams weekly. His conferences were selling out. His name carried more buzz online than many COGIC events combined. It wasn't just a ministry anymore. It was a movement. But with movement comes momentum, and momentum often challenges control. That's when the quiet discussions turned into silent distance. Invitations from certain COGIC events stopped coming. Leadership meetings became fewer. Relationships that were once strong started to cool. Yet through all of this, Carn never lashed out directly. He played it smart, staying respectful in public, but preaching messages filled with subtle clues about his discontent. He used the pulpit not to attack, but to reveal, and every word seemed carefully chosen, a way of speaking truth without breaking rank. Still, the message was clear. He was done being managed. He was done being limited by tradition. And the next phase of his ministry would not be defined by anyone but him. But what exactly pushed him over the edge? What made this respected prophet, who had once stood proudly within COGIC circles, finally decide to break free? Because as some insiders claim, the final straw wasn't just disagreement, it was humiliation. Every major shift in a leader's life is triggered by a moment, one defining event that forces a decision. For Prophet Brian Carn, that moment didn't just happen overnight. It built up quietly, layer by layer, until the weight of controversy, misunderstanding, and control became too heavy to carry within the system he once called home. To understand that breaking point, we have to step inside the tension between calling and conformity. On one side, you had the Church of God in Christ, a denomination with deep traditions, a clear chain of command, and a long history of structure. On the other side stood Brian Carn, a man who preached spontaneity, divine revelation, and prophetic freedom. That clash of philosophies was destined to explode. But what pushed it over the edge wasn't just doctrine, it was exposure. There were whispers that certain members of leadership had grown uneasy with how much attention Carn's ministry was attracting, and how little oversight they had over it. Reports circulated that private meetings took place between Carn and key bishops who urged him to come back into alignment with church order. They wanted him to submit under official COGIC covering to make his new church fully recognized under their authority. According to sources close to the situation, Carn refused. Not out of arrogance, but conviction. He reportedly said, "You can't control a calling that didn't come from you." That one sentence supposedly ended the discussion and marked the beginning of an unspoken separation. Shortly after that, people began noticing changes in his tone and approach. Carn started preaching more frequently about the dangers of denominational bondage and the price of prophetic authenticity. He spoke openly about how some systems value image over impact and how real prophets are often rejected by the very institutions they help build. These weren't random messages. They were reflections of his reality. But the real turning point, the one that made everything public, came during a national church event where Carn was expected to speak. Insiders claim that his name was removed from the lineup at the last minute, allegedly due to internal disagreements. Whether it was political, personal, or spiritual, no one could say for sure. But that single act sent a clear message. He was no longer part of the inner circle. Those close to Carn described that period as both painful and freeing. Painful, because he had invested years in building bridges within COGIC. Freeing, because it forced him to confront the truth. He was never meant to fit inside a system that couldn't handle his calling. Around the same time, his sermons grew more raw, more unapologetic. In one message that went viral, Carn declared, "The problem with the modern church is that it wants prophets to be puppets." The crowd erupted, but church officials were reportedly furious. To them, it was rebellion disguised as revelation. To Carn's followers, it was liberation. Then came the announcement that changed everything. Word began to spread that Prophet Brian Carn would be pastoring a new church, independent, spirit-led, and not officially tied to any denomination. The name Kingdom City became a symbol of his new direction, a global movement focused on spiritual empowerment, prophetic accuracy, and holiness without hierarchy. Social media exploded. Some celebrated the move as a bold step of faith, a true example of obeying God above man. Others saw it as proof of pride and disobedience. Memes, blogs, and YouTube commentators dissected every word he said. Was he leaving because of offense, or was he finally stepping into the full measure of his calling? Even within COGIC circles, opinions were divided. Some younger pastors privately expressed admiration, saying he was doing what they wished they had the courage to do. Others warned that walking away from the covering of the church was dangerous, both spiritually and reputationally. But Carn remained unbothered. In his own words, "When God tells you to move, you don't ask permission. You walk by faith." From that point on, there was no turning back. He officially launched his new church, began expanding his online presence, and even started drawing members from various backgrounds: Baptists, Pentecostals, even some from COGIC who quietly joined his movement online. The break was complete. Prophet Brian Carn was no longer a son of the system. He had become a leader of his own. Yet even as his new chapter began, a lingering question hovered over everything. Did he make this move purely out of divine instruction? Or was this the result of years of conflict, pride, and unresolved pain? Because what came next would blur the line between ministry and movement, and reveal whether this was truly a God-led transition or the beginning of something far more controversial. When Prophet Brian Carn finally announced the launch of his new church, the news didn't just spread, it erupted. What began as whispers in church circles turned into full-blown headlines across social media platforms, gospel news outlets, and YouTube commentary channels. Screenshots of flyers, short clips of his fiery sermons, and testimonies from supporters flooded timelines overnight. Everyone wanted to know one thing: what exactly is Brian Carn building now? The answer, according to Carn himself, was something that had been burning in his spirit for years, a vision he called Kingdom City. Kingdom City wasn't just another congregation, it was a movement. Carn described it as a hub for revival, restoration, and prophetic truth. It was to be a place where believers could experience raw encounters with God, not polished religion, not politics, not programs, but power. He said his mission was to raise up a remnant that refuses to bow to tradition. Those words alone captured the attention of thousands who felt disconnected from traditional church structures. The launch service was something the gospel community hadn't seen in years. Reports say the atmosphere was electric: packed pews, loud worship, people shouting, crying, and falling to their knees. Carn, dressed sharply but with a humble tone, preached a message titled, "Obeying God When It Costs You Everything." It was more than a sermon, it was a statement. He spoke about Abraham leaving his father's house, about Elijah standing alone against false prophets, and about Jesus being rejected by his own. The parallels were impossible to miss. Each example pointed to his own journey, the price of following divine direction, even when it means leaving comfort and connection behind. But as the crowds grew, So did the criticism. Traditional COGIC members questioned his motives. Some accused him of using the platform the church gave him to build his own empire. Others suggested he was surrounding himself with yes men, people who echoed his every word without accountability. They said his messages were becoming too bold, too confrontational, too focused on personal freedom, and not enough on submission to authority. Still, others saw something entirely different. Younger believers, millennials, and Gen Z Christians began flooding his services and online streams. Many said they finally felt seen. They were tired of what they called church politics. They wanted passion, power, and authenticity. And Carn seemed to deliver exactly that. His messages were raw but real. His delivery was both prophetic and relatable. Whether you agreed with him or not, you couldn't deny that he carried influence. Week after week, the numbers increased. Branches of Kingdom City began sprouting up in other cities. Online viewership doubled. People were sharing clips of him saying, "You can't build God's kingdom while bowing to man's structure, and tradition will never birth transformation." These became rallying cries for those who felt spiritually stifled by organized religion. But underneath the excitement, some theologians and church elders voiced deep concern. They warned that independence without accountability can lead to spiritual chaos. One COGIC pastor even stated publicly that a prophet without covering is a ship without anchor. It was a direct jab at Carn, and though he didn't respond publicly, his silence spoke volumes. Instead of defending himself, Carn focused on expansion. He began hosting leadership intensives, prophetic training camps, and citywide revivals. His ministry's branding shifted, no longer promoting denominational partnerships, but highlighting a global movement. It was as if he had drawn a permanent line in the sand. Kingdom City was not a branch of COGIC. It was something entirely new, and that was exactly what stirred the deepest debate.